Not really. Ian, I started writing about Singapore football about 5 or 6 years ago, and I'd write about things about how they're not marketing the game, they're not selling the game, this is not happening, that's not happening, and eventually I gave up because I had no answers. And now you've come along and you decided you've got a few answers. You're trying to change a complete mindset. You're trying to turn the apathetic into the interested. Number one, why? And number two, how?
And two very good questions, and ones I have to ask myself, particularly the first one on a daily basis. Okay, so why? I live here first and foremost. I'm passionate about football. I enjoy football. And I've got a desire to see the sport grow in Singapore. And I think that for the sport to grow, whether it be at grassroots level or anything else, there needs to be a strong professional game. And I grew up on Merseyside. I'm aware of the passion and the importance of football overall, and I think that it's important that we look to replicate that in the S League here, and that is something that we are now engaged in doing. So how? Well, how is a much bigger question, and let me give you the simple answer. Football is about passion. Fans are interested in a side that represents their values and gives them an opportunity to interact in a variety of ways. I don't think the S League has done a bad job. I don't think the clubs have done a bad job. I think that sometimes there have been issues around execution and maybe priorities which come from the overall club structure, and I'm alluding there to the dependence on jackpot machines and that type of area for revenue. I think that as a fan I would be disappointed, particularly in a market such as Singapore, where there are a lot of things which are contesting to get your attention. And what I'm suggesting is that clubs consciously going after the fan, developing their relationship with the fan, and then being able to make this into a commercial long-term relationship is going to be something that's going to allow the clubs to build a platform for themselves to grow on, and that's exactly what we're trying to achieve with Project Tribe.
So you think that the clubs haven't been doing that until now? I've been banging my head about this one, scratching my head. Why not? I mean, these guys watch the Premier League every week. They can tell you the lineup for Manchester United for every cup final for the last 27 years. Of course, there was no football before the Premier League. Why are they watching one thing in England and then not thinking, well, why can't we do the same here? Where's the disconnect?
Because why would they need to? If you take a look at the financial performance of a football club, less than a double-digit percentage is generated from football-related activities. So therefore, as the business owner, as the business manager, I'm clearly going to direct an awful lot of my efforts to the revenue generation, and in this case it predominantly comes from clubhouse activities. It doesn't in any shape or form look like football is the main area. Now, that wouldn't have been the case maybe in the 1996, 1997 in the early years, but we are at a stage now where it is the case, and we're gone from the days when a marketing manager is going to be able to persuade a club chairman to spend a $10,000 on a fan-based initiative that may generate an extra 1,000 people turning up. An extra 1,000 people is phenomenal for a football stadium, but 1,000 times $5 does not equal $10,000. Okay. And especially if I can then say maybe only spend $5,000 rather than $10,000 on another jackpot machine or another activity in the clubhouse, which will then in turn. So I think yes, they can see it, but at the end of the day, it is about making payroll, keeping our jobs, and maybe some of them will argue even keeping the club's very existence there. The fact that the name's still there is the main thing, and that has not come through football-related activities in the last 10 years.
So the football is almost like takes a backseat to people sticking money into a fruit machine.
I think from a club business perspective, yes, it does. I don't think from a fan perspective it does. I don't think the fans have gone off and joined, Geylang United or Corcham Lions or whatever just because of the clubhouse facilities. But I think from a business perspective, yes, it has done.
In England, I read a survey recently. It seems like, for example, Arsenal make 20% of their revenue from merchandising. They make about 50% from TV revenue. Here you're saying maybe about 90% comes from the fruit machines.
Yes, 90%. I would go as far as to argue it could be more, but yes, I mean jackpot machines and club activities generally account for the vast majority of the revenue. It's certainly not, as you very much reported yourself, come from, should we say, development of football-related commercial opportunities. And if let's take a look at what we've been doing with the Courts Young Lions. As a football club, we have three sources of primary revenue. One of them is obviously commercial sponsorship, and that can take forms in many forms. That can either be actual club overall sponsorship, that can be match day sponsorship, and that can then be associations around it. Then we obviously have merchandise itself, and then we also have ticketing revenue, right, which is the obvious one. TV licensing, and the way we're set up and we're funded in Singapore is somewhat different to the English system, and also to the Major League in the United States. The challenge that the clubs have got here is that ticketing revenue is never going to amount to anything significant at the $5 status, particularly when you take into account the capacity of the stadiums. But what we identified when we secured the Courts Young Lions, their sponsor in courts, was that the ability to understand how large the supporter base was, how large it could become, and then combine that with the activation opportunities that Courts Young Lions would get, presented over a longer term period, produced something which was profitable for Courts. And if Courts can associate through its S-League sponsorship with its Heartland audience, with its willingness to support grassroots football, to drive community driven sports, and to also utilise the fan base of the club itself to generate foot traffic in, then it becomes profitable. So from a club's perspective, sponsorship is an important one. Merchandise is important not just from its revenue perspective. I think that merchandise could in turn represent probably higher than ticket revenue in many cases for successful clubs. But I think in the case of S-League, the brand association alone is likely to start to generate exactly what you and I would want to see, which is people turning up wearing club colours, feeling they're part of a club, the passion that's involved in club, the inspired loyalty that comes from that, and then in turn the increased audiences.
So with the Young Lions you introduced now, you've got different membership schemes, and you're selling club merchandise, which makes you almost unique in Singapore. Is it selling? Are you selling shirts? Are people coming up and buying the shirts and the shorts and the hats and what have you?
They very much are, and in fact they're encouraging us to increase the line of what we actually do. I think if you were to take a look at the first game of the season that we had, there was a good spattering of red from people that purchased shirts on the day. If you go to the second game of the season, when we entertained Geylang United recently, you would see that the Courts Young Lions home section was virtually dominated by red jerseys, and I'm still smiling when I'm going around Singapore and seeing people wearing these jerseys on the street. I have.
Just stop them in the street, take photographs.
I kind of feel like going over and shaking their hands, So, but this is I don't know about your good self with Arsenal, but for me, I have a box of Everton jerseys which my wife is desperate for me to get rid of. But my children have had, from their first romper suits to their, every kit. My son's had every kit in the last 7 seasons. My daughter's had every kit in the last 5 seasons, and that's part of being passionate about the club, and I've got that throughout. So merchandise is selling, but merchandise plays 2 parts. It helps in the overall revenue, obviously, but it also is something to engage a fan. It allows them to demonstrate their identity, and it certainly plays well in the overall brand marketing of having individuals walking around wearing their club colours proudly on their chest.
So you've had 2 home games against SAFSA, against Geylang, and you had over 2,700 I think for each game.
Yeah.
Your next home game's against who?
Well, that's the question at the moment. We're away at Hougang this week, and hopefully that'll be another good 3 points. We'd like to be able to take that. But then after that, we have got a break, and that comes from the fact that the vast majority of the Coach Young Lions make up the Singapore Olympic team, and they're away on international duty in the UAE to play the Yemen game. That in turn is actually 2 matches played over 3 days, for the home and away legs both being played on neutral ground. So with that being the case, that has interrupted the fixtures, and FAS at the present time are just working through the operations with the operations teams to work out when our next home game will actually be. But our next one was cancelled, or postponed I should say, which is a week tomorrow.
So from the commercial point of view, then that's going to be kind of frustrating, because you're looking at momentum you built over the first 2 games.
It is. But the difference between maybe the situation if we were doing this last year and this year is that we've got a very engaged social media following. We are putting out the magazine shows on the Coach Young Lions TV. We are placing and communicating with the fans via the fan book. By the fan newsletter. So these things mean that you're always touching the fan base on a regular basis. But yes, would I love to be able to have a weekly or an every other week home game that I could plan to, for a whole host of reasons, not just from a fan base perspective, but also operationally, the halftime entertainment, the activation of the sponsors, a whole mass of challenges, which is why we've been in a meeting for the last few hours discussing how we're going to overcome those.
All right. Given well publicised problems plaguing Singapore football, and let's face it, the Singapore media loves to highlight the problems, are you still confident that you're going to be able to instill some kind of culture, some kind of atmosphere into the young Lions over the space of this season?
Well, clearly we hope so, and clearly the intention is to make sure that very much happens. I think make a very valid point here. The media, without exception, has very publicly come out and said, let's give this a go, right? Let's get behind Project Tribe and let's see, because they understand the importance of it. I think an awful lot of their reaction in the latter part of last year was that they just didn't feel they were being communicated to. They could see the issues, but they couldn't see the acknowledgement of the issues, and that allowed them to continue down that thread. By our employment as such, I think that what has occurred is that people have seen that there's been an acknowledgement that things could be done a little bit better, and I think that when I communicate with my team at the moment, we are making it clear that when it comes to December 2011, the result will be the result. It's a wonderful, and it's the good and the bad here, right? It either has worked from a numbers perspective or it hasn't worked from a numbers perspective.
And what is success?
Well, success is not about one-time audience figures, right? So success is a retained, sustainable audience figure, which the crowd is coming back week on week with developed other revenue streams. And what I mean by that is that both commercial sponsorship, merchandise, and all of those particular areas are strong and building. A more community-driven club that has involvement in other areas, whether it be through volunteers on match day and those type of aspects. Maybe a change in the demographic of people that are attending matches as well. You will agree with me, I'm sure, that your allegiance to a football team is not set at 16, 18, or whenever the British Premier League started, right? It is something that is done when you're born, or maybe at 5 or 6. So we are very much working towards seeing a huge increase in families to attend these events, because that's when we believe that people will start associating it with regular attendance. Come December, we sit down and let's ignore the figures for whatever they may be. They may be phenomenally great that we won't have the discussion. They may be not so great. But we will be able to sit down. FAS will be able to sit down and say, during this year we did increased commercial opportunities. We increased when it came to merchandise sales. We did over 35 match day activities. We did 40 activations with our major sponsors. We produced Facebook, Twitter, all of those particular areas. We did Coach Young Lions TV. We had Pele and Cantona there, and we've got some other stuff which is starting to develop as well. So with all of those in place, if it still did not happen, what would I suggest? Well, I would suggest then that we've got maybe even bigger structural issue. I don't think it's cultural. I think it is structural, but I would definitely like to make sure that at the end of this year we're looking for something that will move forward.